We'll go live. Hi,
Okay,
everyone. Really happy to introduce Foday. Is that how I pronounce it?
that's correct, Kaz, yes.
Would you, a part of the Bloody Scotland debut panel? Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your book?
Yeah, my name is Foday Mannah. I was born in London, but I grew up in Sierra Leone, West Africa. So my novel is The Search for Othello Savage. That's it there. It's more or less a crime fiction book based on a real life event that happened in Edinburgh in 2008, wherein a nurse was abducted from a flat in Edinburgh and was locked in the boot of a car for about 10 days. And so I use that as a premise, as a foundation to write a crime novel. So added to the whole premise of a nurse being abducted and put in a car, I chose also to look at things like, for example, the insidious use of power with a special focus on political corruption, but also focus on religion, how religion can be used as a medium to do things that are quite dark and dastardly. So that's my novel again. So it focuses on immigrant population, Sierra Leonean ladies who live in Edinburgh who experience this trauma and the difficulties they face.
That's like an interesting concept for a book as well, using like a real life event as your jumping off point. Does that make it easier or harder, do you think?
I suppose, yeah. I mean, to start with, it's quite easy to start with, Kaz. But of course, you only have that as a foundation. So I found it quite trying when you have the foundation. How can you then build it from there? So I think rather quite spontaneously with the initial premise of a woman being abducted, more or less just grew arms and legs. I think my background is, I would say, well, not necessarily my background, but I tend to write more literary fiction. I think there's an expectation, especially where we come from. Say, for example, writers from Africa, that we always have to address like big issues. So you think, for example, like slavery or immigration or Windrush or Jim Crow. So I think even growing up in Sierra Leone back in the day, I think there was always suspicion when you mentioned crime fiction. So I think I had that in the back of my mind in the sense that I had to try and produce like a kind of like a hybrid novel that in one from one perspective it is your stereotypical missing person novel, but then it also tries to examine other themes or other broader themes.
Do you think that's still the situation? I mean, we've got sort of amazing authors like T.L. Hoochoo who are writing urban fantasy and things now. So do you think that's still a thing that you feel like you have to address issues or?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, it's an interesting one. I was listening to, I think it was Chimamanda Adichie. I think I saw on Instagram recently speaking about that. I think, and even at times you're in spaces. So, for example, I'm in a space with people I went to university with, and a lot of the time when they speak literature, they always still speak about it's Chinua Achebe, it's Ngugi wa Thiong'o, it's Mongo Betty. So it's more or less African writers from the 60s. I mean, and like Chimamanda correctly says, their concerns were quite different because if you grew up in Africa in the 60s, of course, it was things like independence or colonialism or empire. So I think the challenge we sometimes have is convincing people that the African perspective or the Black perspective is not one dimensional in the sense you could also look at all these other issues. So, because I always remember my first day in university back in Sierra Leone, going into the lectures, and I remember the lecturer actually denigrating crime fiction, more or less saying that they're not novels. He described them as not being novels, and he described them as being crime and sex fiction. And I always found that classification to be quite problematic, because I always thought, well, some of these novels that you look down at, for example, look at very, very, very deep issues to do with life and the world we live in. I was remember, for example, at the time I was reading The Dogs of War by Frederick Forsyth, and I was thinking, you are saying this is not a novel, but this novel is about an African country that has discovered mineral wealth and how corrupt colonial powers more or less try to hire mercenaries to overthrow the government. And my thinking was, yeah, you might say that's crime fiction or just not that important, but that's looking at very, very serious issues. So I suppose that's more or less been at the back of my mind, always trying to think about. There is still this snobbery, I think, But I think with time, I think people are changing.
I think all fiction can be a really good vehicle for exploring
Absolutely.
um, different issues, and especially crime fiction, because it's about why people do the things they do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gordon Brown said hello.
Oh, hello, Gordon. How you doing?
How exciting was it getting the call that you were on the debut shortlist?
Oh, it was surreal in the extreme because I've been in Scotland since the late '90s. So I think when I was doing the math the other day, because I think the country where I spent the most time in my life is actually Scotland. I lived in Scotland more than anywhere else. And I did go up to Bloody Scotland in 2022. They had their Pitch Perfect, whereby if you have an idea for a crime novel, you take the stage in front of a panel of, I think it's publishers and writers, and then you present your idea. So I did present the ideas for Othello Savage, but I did not win. But I think a few months later, I took it down to London and it won a competition. So that was quite good. So it was quite surreal. It's almost as if going full circle. I mean, you pitch, you're not successful, but now you're going back to the same festival. And Scotland has this phenomenally rich, I mean, oeuvre, this phenomenally rich tradition of crime fiction. There's so many phenomenal crime writers. So this is actually, even when I went for the launch of Bloody Scotland, it was quite surreal. It was like more or less being amidst all these celebrity writers, and there's so many of them, and it was actually a humbling experience. So incredibly grateful, incredibly humbled, and incredibly honored.
One of the questions I asked the last debut panel is what do you think makes Scottish crime fiction so stand out? Because you kind of like got the market cornered, really, haven't you? Everyone loves a bit
Yeah,
of
yeah.
Scottish crime. Why do you think it's so phenomenally successful?
I think historically, I think there is something quite. I think Scotland. I mean, I'm not going to start out, but I think Scottish people are incredibly warm and incredibly welcoming. But there's also the other side of the coin, whereby I think you even go back into things like Shakespeare. I think, like for example, Macbeth, which is a Scottish play. So I think there's always been with Scotland, there's always been that more or less that darkness in the background. I think a lot also has to do with the history. I think if you have a history of people, for example, who have historically been more perhaps maybe suppressed, you think about more or less, for example, how the English treated them back in the day. I think that always creates a foundation for more or less to look at the dark side of human nature. So I think possibly, yes, more or less to do with that. And there's just something about Edinburgh, especially. Edinburgh, especially as a city, has these beautiful dimensions to it, where it's very, very bright and very, very lovely, but it also has quite dark and dastardly history to it to certain sections. And I think that lends itself quite well to crime fiction. Again, also the weather is not the best, so symbolically speaking, there might be something in there also. It's lots of rain and it's lots of cold, so I think it lends itself quite well as a backdrop for crime fiction.
Have you prepared a winner's speech just in case?
Oh no, I'm not going to win. So no, 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 no winners. I'm just incredibly happy to just be in that space. Like I said, I mean, absolutely honored. So if I win, no, but I think I've won already in the sense that I mean, publication is normally quite. It's a difficult road. I think I did a writing degree in Stirling, so not in Stirling. I applied for a writing degree in Glasgow for Glasgow University, and I wasn't accepted. So it just goes to show that there's rejection all around. So just being shortlisted for this competition is validation enough. And I'm incredibly honored to just be in that space. So there's no speech, no.
It's Gordon says it's a wonderful book. He really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you, Gordon. Gordon,
And Laura Hamilton, who's watching, has said hello as well.
hi, Laura. How you doing?
I absolutely love the Bloody Scotland prize lists.
Oh, they're
So
brilliant.
many, like I don't know how they pick the winners because so many of them every year end up being like my favourite books of the year.
Yeah, true.
So you're right, being on the shortlist is a big deal.
Oh, they're phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I think I was reading when I met Callum McSorley, who's one of the, just like Gordon, just delightful, such warm, endearing human beings. And I read his novel, I think it was Squeaky Clean, and it was just blew me away. Phenomenal. Christopher Brookmeyer, Lynn Anderson, Dennis Miner, I mean, Gordon, Morgan Cry, and there's so many others. I mean, Marion Todd. I mean, they're just phenomenal writers. And at times on the surface, people more or less might not understand them, but they, even though at times, they, for example, there are police procedurals and look at, for example, murders and kidnappings and the seedy underbelly of crime in these urban situations, but they're just phenomenally distinct novels in their own rights that are just fantastic reads. I totally agree. They're just lovely.
Yeah, Laura's saying she doesn't envy the judges.
I know. Yeah, I agree with you, Laura. They're really, really quite good. They're brilliant.
Yeah, I don't. I am about halfway through reading them, like the debut prize books, and I don't know. They're all good.
Oh, good. I know. I mean, just like I said, just to be in that space is honor enough. So that's brilliant.
So going on back to your book, can you, if some people are watching who've not read it, introduce us to your main character?
My main character, actually, again, it was quite. My main character is a lady called Hawa Barry, who is in studying in Scotland. She's doing a degree at the University of Stirling International Conflicts and Cooperation, which was a degree I did myself, I think, on about 2008. So I use that more or less if we can place her in Scotland as someone who's studying. So it then becomes a case of her best friend, Othello Savage, happens to disappear. And it's a case of her trying to find out what happened to Othello. So first of all, more or less, a lady gets abducted and locked in the car of her boots, and then Othello disappears. So of course, the fear is more or less that a similar thing has happened to Othello. So that's I used part of my own circumstances, but I thought to take what happened to me in real life, well, certain aspects of my life, to situate it within the context of a woman, I thought would be able to be quite interesting, especially when you think about gender. I mean, universally, cause I mean, there are massively gender imbalances. I mean, you think about all the Me Too movement, but phenomenally much more so in the developing world. Like, for example, where I come from, where women are much more likely to face discrimination. And so what I found out growing up in Sierra Leone was the fact that they were therefore held up to these stereotypical expectations. So, for example, where I come from, if you're a woman, one, you have to have a child. That's like there's no compromise for that. The expectation is that you have to bear a child, and if you don't have a child, it's more or less seen as a sign of personal failure. There's also the expectation that you have to be married, but not just married, but you also have to be married to a man who's rich. In our culture, a good man is a rich man. So you have this scenario where at times the women are they have like despicable husbands, horrific men who are quite abusive, but just because they're rich or wealthy or well off, the expectation is that they have to stay with these men. So that's more or less what informs the novel, that the church uses this against these women. And a lot of that happens where I come from. When women are told, for example, you need to get a husband or you need to marry a rich man or and things like that. So they're also convinced that to achieve these stereotypical markers of femininity, they have to go to church. You can achieve these things through spiritual intervention. So what you then therefore have is that the church basically becomes this very, very significant and powerful body that dictates the lives of these women. And at times that can always go into very, very dark places. And that's more or less what I try to do.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea to explore, isn't it? Because I think in all areas of the world, we've had times where the church can
Yeah,
have quite an impact on people's lives, especially women. Thinking about things like the Scottish witchcraft trials
absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
and things. That's a very similar thing to what you
Yeah.
just feel like the impact of the church on women is quite interesting. Um, is that a particular sort? You were saying that's a particular problem in Sierra Leone.
Oh, yes, definitely. So I think religion in general, whether it be, I mean, almost I mean, growing up in Israel, everybody believes, Kaz. I mean, whether it's Christianity or Islam, it's almost as if 99.9% of people across Africa believe in religion. So the point I was making is that if you are therefore able to harness this power, if you're more or less able to convince people that I am a proxy to, for example, God, that is significant power. And that's exactly what happens. I remember my stepmother coming. There's a character in the book, for example, called Auntie Teresa, who is based on my stepmother. My stepmother came here in, I think, 2005 to help. She was here for about 6 months, but it's almost as if she'd been brainwashed, Kat, because she joined one of these churches back home. And even simple things like, for example, it's quite cold in Scotland. What we normally try and do, we wear like long johns and trousers or tracky bottoms, and she refused to wear them. She said her pastor had said to her that trousers are not Christian dressing for women, so she wouldn't wear trousers because the pastor back home, and that's true. You go to these churches back home, and none of the women wear trousers, and they all have their heads covered or tied up and things like that. It's almost as if they have to like douse their femininity. So it's more or less things like that. I was looking at thinking somebody else has more or less passed down this edict to you that you have taken as gospel, no pun intended. That so no matter whatever a pastor said was gospel, and this is what more or less operates. There's another scene I think in the novel whereby people see visions. Again, that happened to me when I'm in fifth year. I just taken my O levels, and again it was my stepmother brings these religious people to our sitting room, and then they pray, and then somebody shuts their eyes, cars, and opens their eyes and said, "I've seen a vision." And then they say, "What's the vision have you seen?" So I've seen a vision about cars and cars. I've seen cars at airports, which means she's going to be traveling overseas. And then everybody applauds. Yeah, because they believe what this person says. And when you look at it, it's all just completely made up. It's not true again. But I remember at the time, my vision was basically this woman said she'd seen a vision of me tied up with rope, subdued on the ground. So, of course, that was more or less symbolically interpreted as to be something quite dark. So I was then told that I had to fast for 7 days. And on the seventh day, I was supposed to go to a stream and wash myself with holy oils. And I did it because I remember I was only in fifth year, so I must have been what, 16, 17 at the time. But you believe these things. So that's again is another scene in the novel whereby they tell Howard that we've had a vision of you subdued on the ground and you need to do certain things. So a lot of the time is you can only look back now when you're grown up and look back and realize that a lot of what people said back then wasn't true at all. It's basically them taking religion into very dark places.
So with this book, are you planning a sequel to it, or is it a standalone?
At the moment, I thought it could be a standalone. I mean, there have been maybe smatterings of the possibility of. I quite like the character of Detective Inspector Cynthia McEwen, who's the investigating officer in the novel. I just think there's a possibility of her maybe getting something else for her. But to be honest, nothing too major. There are one or two ideas marinating my mind, but nothing too major at the moment.
So are you working on anything else at the moment, or?
Well, for my degree, when I did a writing degree at Falmouth University, because, like I said, I grew up in Sierra Leone during a civil war. So that informed quite a lot of what we wrote at the time. Well, all of us who grew up during the Civil War, because it was so harrowing and it was so visceral. It was more or less in your face. So, as part of my degree, what I tried to write, I remember us having an assignment about trying to write from the perspective of an unreliable narrator, and I thought about perhaps having something to do with a child soldier who's not a child soldier but says he's a child soldier because he wants to get certain benefits to do with rehabilitation. So I'd written that a long time ago and I sent it out to lots of publishers, over 60 publishers, but nobody picked it up. There's no rejection. So I suppose that's always been on the back burner card. So that could be something I could maybe return to and see what I could do with that.
Yeah, I was curious as to whether you would ever set something completely in Sierra Leone.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one exactly. And quite a lot of my short stories. So yeah, that is set. Again, it's set in Sierra Leone, but also I've always liked the idea of connecting Sierra Leone to Scotland. So it's basically focuses on a rehabilitation center for child soldiers that is established by a Scottish charity. So the director of the rehabilitation center in Sierra Leone is actually a Scottish lady. So again, that crossover there. Again, where you're transported from Scotland and then you move to Sierra Leone to oversee these children in this orphanage and how these characters basically interact. So that was the idea.
We've been joined by Patricia Forsyth. She's
Patsy.
our Scottish admin. She's superb. She's a big champion of Scottish authors.
All right, cool. Hi, Patsy.
She wants you to know that she really enjoyed your book.
Oh, thanks, Patsy.
It was different, and she's got a ticket for Edinburgh International Book Festival.
All right, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think that's on August the 23rd. Thanks, Patsy.
So yeah, she'll be coming to see you. She'll probably go to bloody Scotland as well, to be honest. She goes to all of them. And then Laura wants to ask you one of our group favourite questions.
Okay, hi, Laura.
Have you ever acted out a scene to help with the writing process?
So act out scene, no, I'm not. I mean, physically act it out, no. To be honest, or I think I just think. I don't think with me. It's interesting when you do a writing degree, you get all these ideas about how to plot things and how to act things up. But I'm a bit of a rebel when it comes to that. I think the best writing has to be just spontaneous and unfettered. There's that great movie, I think it stars Sean, even though it's Sean Connery, I think it's Finding Forrester. It's a completely made up movie where he plays a writer, but something he says as a writer is you write your first draft with your heart, and then, of course, you write your second draft with your head. And that's the way I look at it. Literally, just put words down to paper. When I write, there's no specific plots. You just see where things take you. So, for you have a premise and a foundation, and you start to build on the foundation, but I don't think you can be too precious about what you create. At times, the narrative just goes where it wants to go. A typical example was my piece on my child soldiers. I was the child soldier was a boy, but I think I remember getting to midway through the novel and thinking, actually, we are going to admit girls for the first time to this rehabilitation center. And then it always just occurred to me, well, actually, the story is not the boys anymore. Yeah, the boys have experienced trauma in the war, but how do we classify girls who are affected by war? So, of course, I remember pivoting and just thinking, well, actually, the main character can't be a boy anymore. It has to be a girl. And that's a typical example about you don't necessarily have to act things out, but just you create and see where things take you, if that makes sense.
So, when you're starting on your writing process, do you get the idea of the characters first, or the inciting event, or what sort of starts you off with the inspiration?
I think maybe the events, but again, it's a bit of an amalgamation of ideas. So, for example, of course, there was the abduction of the nurse. But I remember many years ago, there was also a documentary I watched with my older daughter. It was called Rincers, and it was about more or less women who have these online systems whereby they try to hook up with rich men. There's no sex at all, but they hook up with rich men with the expectation that rich men can finance their lavish lifestyles. And I remember it being called, I think it was in Channel 4 called Rincers. So I had this more or less this girl who was abducted in the boot of a car. I also had Rincers in the background, and then I also had something to do with religion. So at times it's like a motley collection of ideas and concepts and characters, and they all just come together. So of course you have the idea. I think the idea starts first, and then you put a character to more or less become the channel or the avenue through which your idea takes root.
So, once these have taken root, oh, sorry, I'm reading what Patsy has said. She said she's going to have to wander Leith and find the places that you've set your book.
All right, cool. Yeah, it's a quite different Edinburgh, I know.
Oh, we've got David.
Hello.
Hi, sir.
For some reason, your audio is coming through the wrong thing. 2 seconds.
While we're waiting for that, tell us which character you've created in your book, Foday, that you'd like to go for a drink with.
Ooh, that's an interesting one. I think it will be Othello Savage, actually, the name. Even though she seems to be at times, she's quite morally complex. There's something quite, I think there is something quite, I don't want to spoil, of course, the book. There is something about her, but I just like her. Even though she's, for example, at the head of the whole scheme to raise money for the church, there's something quite, I like her independence. I like the fact she's socially conscious. I like the fact that she has this keen sense of awareness. So it will definitely be Othello Savage I'll go for a drink with.
Hi, David.
Hello, how you doing?
All right, how are you?
I'm good. I'm a little sweaty. It's quite warm here in Scotland at the moment.
We are live. So, would you like to introduce yourself to our readers?
Hello.
And tell us a little bit about your book.
No worries. My name is Dave Goodman. My book is The Reluctant Spy. You can see it on either side of me here. It is a novel about a young man called Jamie Tulloch, and he is a sales executive, but he came from a fairly rough background. Went to Cambridge and then was identified by a program called the Legends Program, which basically said, we will give you a network in your life that you don't have at the moment. We will make sure you get good jobs and pay off your student loans. And in return, we will give you will come and use your identity at some point. And he signs up for that deal. I think anyone with student loans might consider it. And then he ends up accidentally on the mission himself through various shenanigans, and has to figure out how to be a spy without any training.
Gordon said hello to you as well, David. Foday Patsy said she found your book had politics, religion, culture, and can she say people trafficking?
Yeah, well, to some extent, I wouldn't say definitely politics. Definitely politics. Yeah, I would think the political corruption. I think at the center of what we write is political corruption. Our systems back home, well, I suppose globally, but much more so in our systems back home in Africa, where the corruption is much more rife and much more rampant. So yeah, that had to come into my novel. I think it's a pastor's brother who happens to be a government minister who is complicit in acts of corruption.
And Dave, she says she finished your book too and found it interesting. She calls it a very modern John le Carrier.
I will take that comparison and be very happy with it. Yes, I think I have more exploding helicopters and things like that than John le Carrier might do. But yeah, every time somebody mentions me in the same breath as John le Carrier, I'm fairly happy.
We've just been covering how you felt when you discovered you were on the debut list.
Is that for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a pretty remarkable moment. I got a call from Bob McDevitt. I knew I'd been put forward for it, but I'd kind of sort of forgotten about it because you get put forward for a lot of things, and you try not to get your hopes up about these sorts of things. And then I took this call, and I got an email that said, "Are you free for a quick call?" And that's usually a good thing. So I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And I was thinking maybe I've got an additional panel or something at Bloody Scotland, but no, it was the debut prize. And having been to Bloody Scotland 2 or 3 times in the last few years, and doing Crime in the Spotlight last year, it just felt like a really nice additional thing, and I'm really pleased.
What's interesting, and I guess both of you have sort of brought that out in your answers, and I think this is a really good thing about Bloody Scotland as a festival. You both have been and taken part in different things, so like Pitch Perfect or Crime in the Spotlight. Do you think that's another thing that's kind of encouraging the new wave of like authors in Scotland, the fact that festivals are doing things like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Bloody Scotland and other festivals like I Write in Glasgow, Chimera in Edinburgh, which is focused on fantasy and science fiction, all these smaller festivals, and Bloody Scotland's probably one of the biggest ones in Scotland, but there's loads of these kind of reader-driven and passionate local festivals, and all of those are giving people opportunities to try out things, to attend sessions with agents. There's quite a close connection between, I think, between the world of readers and the world of like publishing, and there's a lot of people who love books and want to read and want to write as well, and I think a lot of festivals very successfully weave those together.
Is that something you've noticed as well, Foday?
Yeah, definitely. I think like Dave said, I think the access it provides, I think, it's can be incredibly rewarding for anybody who wants to more or less get on the ladder of publishing. Because, like for example, when I went to Bloody Scotland, it was just I go to Edinburgh almost Edinburgh International Festival every year, but 2022 was the first time I went to Bloody Scotland, and the sheer scale of it. Because I think I went to see Lynn Anderson and Christopher Bookmeyer and Claire McIntosh do a panel together. It was phenomenal. And then, of course, you go to Pitch Perfect. And I think just the very fact that you realize that you are going to be presenting in front of people who are quite established in the industry and a hall full of people, I think there are very few opportunities like that. The whole submission and the whole writing industry can be quite closeted and quite closed. So I think Bloody Scotland especially, that was a unique, and I think absolutely that definitely does encourage people to more. And you think, even you look at the names, I went to see Kate Foster, I think about a couple of months ago in Edinburgh, and you find out all these people who actually trod that same path, Kaz. So it's incredibly humbling to think about, these are phenomenally talented people, but they all maybe started here before they went on their different journeys. So definitely, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Kate Foster. Absolutely adore her books.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Discovered her from the debut.
Yeah, it's
I
fantastic.
shortlist. Big fan. Patsy's looking for a ticket to catch David. Apparently you're at Trinity Church. Is that true?
On at Bloody Scotland.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
she can buy a ticket
I
to
think
see
there are
you.
still tickets available for that.
And go on.
I know the debut panel's sold out, I think, but the spy panel that I'm on, I think, has some tickets left.
Yeah, the same.
Gordon said, sorry. Go
No,
on,
no,
Barry.
no, can't go quite so fast.
Gordon was saying for info this year, Crime in the Spotlight will see its 150th author take to the stage.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Before the biggest event since they started it in 2015. And I think it is, I think Bloody Scotland's, of all the crime festivals, I know the one that champions other authors the most.
And Crime in the Spotlight for me was particularly kind of amazing because it was the day after my book came out. My book came out on the Thursday, and I went to Bloody Scotland on the Friday, and I spoke in front of before Frank Gardner's session, so it was in the Albert Halls in the main hall, hundreds of people. They were obviously mostly there to see Frank Gardner, but it was this incredible experience of just being able to read out stuff from my book, and then I got to sit on a signing table with Frank Gardner, and that was just a phenomenal kind of capper to launch week for my book. So yeah, it was amazing.
That's pretty amazing. I asked Foday to introduce his main character, so I'm going to ask you to do the same.
Absolutely. So Jamie Tulloch is I'm always quite careful to say he's not me, even though we are both kind of lower middle-aged Scotsmen from West Edinburgh. But he is he grew up kind of two housing estates over from where I grew up, essentially. I grew up in kind of East Craigs, and in my head he's from Wester Hill, somewhere around that in West Edinburgh. And he gets himself to university without any real help apart from a couple of teachers, and he's at Cambridge. And when he's at Cambridge, he's feeling very out of his environment, very much a small fish in a big pond. And I've definitely been that as well. I moved to London after I did my degree and got this kind of quite fancy IT consulting job, and a lot of the people I worked with were Oxbridge graduates, and I very, very much felt quite out of place. And I think Jamie does too. And then, he, at 23, he makes this bargain and then spends the next 10 years wondering if he's made the right decision, essentially. And I think that is common as well. I think so many people feel like they've set their life on a particular course when they're at a certain age and they make a certain choice. And he literally has. He signed the Official Secrets Act and signed away his life for a decade at least. So the book is largely about him reckoning with whether that was the right decision or not.
Fascinating. A question I love to ask, and because you're both new, I can. Would either of you like to see a graphic novel made of your books?
Graphic novel, that's a new one.
It's an interesting one.
Foday, what do you think?
It's an interesting one because, of course, you always normally assume that graphic novels maybe perhaps lend themselves maybe a bit better to maybe what David is writing. I don't know. I think it will be better as compared to mine. I don't know, but yeah, I wouldn't say no to that. It'll be interesting to see how that takes shape. Definitely. So yeah, I wouldn't say no to that. I think that would be a great idea.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about graphic novels is that they can, and I've got a few on the shelf behind me here, is that they can take the best elements of film and the best elements of prose and put them together, in that you can have the internality of a character, you can have their thoughts on the page in a way that you can't in film without like a really clunky voiceover. So you can have people saying things and then thinking something else. You can do a bunch of things. So I think it would actually work quite well, because spy novels have people pretending to be who they're not, and trying to hide their emotions and all those sorts of things. And I think you could do that quite well in a graphic novel. Plus, you can have like things exploding and missiles and all the stuff that happens spoilers, I guess, at the end of the book, it gets quite kinetic at the end of the book. So I think graphic novels, it would look pretty good. I'd like to see a full double-page spread of all the exciting stuff that happens in the final sort of quarter of the book. That'd be amazing.
What does a typical writing day look for both of you? Because I know Foday's a teacher, and I can't imagine how you actually get anything else done doing that job. Writing an entire novel.
Again, like I said earlier on, I think there's no fixed routine. My sacred month card is July because of what I do. Because being a teacher, I think July is the only month as a Scottish teacher that you offer the entire month. So my targets in July normally become maybe write about 1,000 words a day, right, for the entire July. So my thinking is, well, at least can get me about 30,000, at least 1,000 a day. But beyond that, it's very spontaneous. It could be at times certain days after school I stay till about maybe 5:30 at school, on the odd weekend here and there. But there's no fixed routine at all. It's just whenever I can find time to just squeeze in some writing, and that's all I do.
What about you?
I'm the precise opposite. I'm a daily or weekday writer, so I write every morning. 95% of mornings. Sometimes I get up too late, or something happens, or I have to leave early to get into the office. But I work from home, so most of the time, I only go into the office a couple of days a month. So the rest of the time, I am at home, and I get up about 5:30, which I hate. But which everyone seems to think makes me very virtuous and disciplined. It's largely habit, and my cats are trained to sort of wake me up now. And I get up at 5:30, get showered, get a cup of tea, then I write for an hour and a half, then I go out for a walk just to have some time in the day that I'm not in my home office where I'm sitting now. Because if I didn't have that walk in the day, that'd be sort of 12 hours continuous in one place, and that's not great. So I do that, go for a walk, come back, start my work day. And it works really well for me because it means my evenings are free and I'm not spending the whole day thinking, oh God, I need to do the writing. I'm done and dusted and the work is done before I even start my day job for the day. And it means my evenings are my own. And, I spent a long time trying to make it work at different times just because I really didn't want to get up at 5:30 in the morning. But that's what works, unfortunately. If I'm ever lucky enough to go full time, that is 100% the first thing that I'll change. Even though people seem to think it's really disciplined, I'm like, no, I want to start at least 2 hours later, ideally.
Patsy says her cat wakes her up as well.
They've got very accurate internal clocks.
I can imagine.
My cat appears at 5:28 and sort of meows very quietly next to my ear, and if I don't move, you'll start hitting me. So that's pretty effective.
Do you envisage your book being part of a series, David?
I'm not sure. This isn't officially announced yet, but yes, it is going to be part of the series. But I can't tell you much more than that. But if you keep your eyes peeled for in the next 2 or 3 weeks, hopefully you'll see an announcement to that effect.
Good.
And in honor of Sam, who couldn't make the panel today and should have been your interviewer, I'm going to ask you one of her favourite questions, which is if Netflix come knocking on the door to adapt your book, what character would you play?
Character would I play?
Yeah.
Oh.
That's both of you, so you feel free to...
Yeah, Foday, I'll let you answer first because my answer is going to be complicated.
It's a difficult one, of course. Yeah, of course, predominantly, of course, it's a story about ladies. But again, I think, as I said from earlier on, I'll play Hawa Barry, who's the main character, because a lot of her experiences are rooted in my own everyday experience. For example, the degree she studied, the fact she worked as a chambermaid. I remember doing that when I first came to Scotland, working for Quality Link, where you're cleaning more or less bedrooms. The degree she did, growing up underneath her stepmother. So I think the path that I etched for her is more or less predicated on lots of things that happened to me. So if that were the case, I'll go with the main part. I'll play Howard Barry, definitely.
You just have to do a bit of drag.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I could do that very, very, very well. Yeah, absolutely.
So the reason I say my answer would be complicated is that this is not purely hypothetical, because the book's been optioned by Carnival Films, who made Downton Abbey, The Last Kingdom, bunch of other amazing shows. They just made Day of the Jackal, which was the
was
most
amazing.
streamed show on
Yeah,
Sky.
that's so good.
Yeah, and an amazing spy story. So hopefully, if it gets made, that'd be amazing. I think the real answer is that I would probably, I'm hoping to get like a cheeky little walk-on part in the background, just be someone, and there's scenes that are set in like Peckham and scenes that are set in Zanzibar. So I'm obviously hoping for, a little walk-on background part in Zanzibar, because I'd love to go back to Zanzibar. I went there in my 20s, and that was part of the inspiration for the book. But I suspect if I was going to pick an actual speaking character, it wouldn't be Jamie, because I'm not Jamie, but he's kind of the only Scotsman in the book, apart from his opposite number, Garnet, who is the agent who is supposed to impersonate him. But Garnet's an interesting character for various reasons that you find out in the book. So I could probably be Garnet. I could probably play Garnet, especially because he doesn't get much screen time. So I would just show up for a day's shooting, get a wee holiday in Zanzibar into the bargain, and that would be the.
That sounds amazing.
Good answer. What other events have you guys got coming up? What are you doing? Any in-person events apart from Bloody Scotland? Obviously, we'll know you'll be there. But what other events have you got coming up?
I'm going, I think, to the Edinburgh Festival on, I think, the 23rd of August. Apart from those are the two I know at the moment. Yeah, nothing else apart from those two. I think they're whispering. I think about Wigtown. Is it Wigtown, Wigton, or something like that? But Wigton, nothing concrete at the moment yet.
Yeah, I'm doing a few. I've got I'm doing a little signing tour with a couple of my friends, Nicholas Binge and Gareth Brown, who are both kind of speculative fiction authors.
I know Gareth.
Yeah, Gareth's a lovely guy. We're doing a little tour of bookshops in Fife, just to sign copies and meet readers and stuff in early August. I will probably be at the book festival just as a punter, because I kind of go as much as I can every year. I'm going to Harrogate Crime Fest, Theakston's in July, in next week, which I'm looking forward to. And then next year I'm going to Stockport Noir, which is a one-day. It's quite new. It's only its second year, I think, which is a one-day crime and thriller festival in Stockport, just outside Manchester. And I am available for other things as well. So I'm all about the events. I love events.
Well, I'll keep an eye out for you at Harrogate.
I'll be the one floating around, probably looking uncomfortably hot if the weather forecast. Because last year I went last year, and it was before the book came out, and I left Edinburgh in like a flannel shirt and jeans, and I got to Harrogate and it was 35 degrees Celsius in Yorkshire. And I know it's July, but I was like, this is, and thankfully I packed one pair of shorts, so I managed to just about survive the weekend. But it was my natural operating temperature is about 10 degrees cooler than that minimum.
I don't know what the weather's predicting for Yorkshire next week. It's pretty warm today, though.
Yeah, it's probably going to be hot.
So Patsy's got a book group in Rosyth. So she said you're welcome to. I'm sure she'll talk to you.
Yes, I'd love to come to Rosyth
and invite you over.
I'll go anywhere, definitely, Patsy. Yes, the organizer will come talk to your group, definitely.
And in fact, Patsy may be delighted to discover there are several key scenes in the second book set in Rosyth, which is interesting. So yeah, I'd be happy to come and talk to the Rosyth book group, 100%.
Yeah, the same.
For both of you, I think kind of location and sort of things seem to be quite important. Are you ever tempted to take photos of locations you've used in your books and like post them on your author websites so people can picture them?
Yeah. Well, possibly Sierra Leone. I don't know. I mean, because most of it, I think, to be honest, I think the readership is predominantly, much more Scottish than it is Sierra Leone, to be honest, because I don't think people back home have engaged with the novel as much as, say, people, for example, over here. But I think a lot of what I hear is many people say that when they read the novel, they had an interest in maybe going to Sierra Leone, because I think I did try to paint a very, very vivid picture of what life is like in Sierra Leone. The nightlife, even the airports, the culture, the people, the environment, the everyday existence. So definitely that might be something I might do, because I don't think it's very familiar to all the readers. I think Sierra Leone is a very, when you think about African literature, a lot of the time it's either Nigeria or South Africa. So you rarely get novels that focus on Sierra Leone. So definitely that could be something I could look to do, because whereby you get pictures of images of Sierra Leone and basically just give people a bit more of a vivid picture of what these environments are.
Yeah, I think I would probably a lot of the book is set in Zanzibar, and it's set in fictional places in Zanzibar. It's set in like a compound in northern Zanzibar, near a real place called Nungwi, where I went in 2002. The problem is the last time I was in Zanzibar was 2002, and it was all sort of instant cameras and no smartphones really. So I don't really have that many photos from that trip, and also it was nearly 25 years ago. But yeah, I'd love to go back. It's one of the things that I'm super keen to do if the TV show ever comes off. And I don't think they would shoot in Zanzibar. They'd probably end up somewhere like Namibia that has tax breaks for filming and things like that. It's all very complicated. They were getting me very excited with plans when we were in the auction process for the TV rights. But I would love to go back and just see those places again. 20 years later, take a few pictures and be like, this is the hotel where I stayed when I was here, when I was 22 years old. But yeah, I could also wander around like Peckham High Street and Vauxhall Cross, which is where the MI6 headquarters are. And there's a few scenes that are set on like the underground in London. And yeah, I mean, people have seen a lot of photos of the underground. It's not the most exciting or inspiring place to take a photo of, depending on how into civil engineering you are. But yeah, I don't have the iconic. I know Gareth Brown does this. He's got loads of these really beautiful locations.
Yeah, the Book of Doors. When I read Book of Doors,
all over the world, and he takes these amazing photos, and he's like, "This is the hotel where this scene is set," and the readers absolutely love it. But I tend to set my stuff mostly in fictional buildings in real places. So it's the kind of 44 Scotland Street thing, where if you go to Scotland Street, the book 44 Scotland Street by Alexander McCall Smith, the numbers stop at 42. So it's a fictional building tacked onto the end, and I tend to take that approach mainly so that people are not like, that building actually has this kind of terracotta roof. You don't want to necessarily give people ammunition to find fault.
I think, yeah, that's good answers, both of you. I think, Foday, you're definitely on a thing with pictures of Sierra Leone.
Yeah, I think definitely.
Alistair Liddell was a Bloody Scotland debut author, and his books are set in Georgia, and I think it's one of the things that drew people to his books, because people have never been to
Georgia. Yeah, it's an interesting one.
Georgia
definitely.
the country or Georgia the state?
Georgia the country.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if I can write it, if I can say, oh, I'm doing this as a marketing trip, Mr. Taxman, I'm off to, back off to Zanzibar.
Zanzibar sounds fascinating. Yeah,
I'm not sure that would fly as a write-off.
You never know. If you could write in any other genre, both of you, what would you picture or do?
You go first, David.
That's not theoretical for me. I write in multiple genres. So my novel that I got representation with when I signed with my agent was a near future science fiction novel. It's kind of a spy novel as well, but it's set sort of 40 years in the future in a sort of post-climate collapse world. That didn't get bought, unfortunately, because it was kind of too thriller for the sci-fi imprints and too sci-fi for the thriller imprints, and they both were like, not sure how to sell this. But I now have a science fiction novel that just went out on submission to editors a couple of weeks ago. And you can probably tell by the shelves behind me that I read in both genres. I write fantasy as well. I write all kinds of different stuff. So science fiction and fantasy are my kind of second loves alongside spy thrillers and the kind of stuff that I write now.
Yeah, the same. I think, of course, like I said to you earlier, because I think the expectation is, I think a lot of the time we are preconditioned to write literary fiction. So, similar to David, something I produced that's not been picked up was literary fiction, more or less based on the Civil War. But if I could, I definitely like magical realism, a bit of fantasy. I've written a few short stories. It's because more or less to do with our folklores back home in growing up in Sierra Leone. I think every culture has these fascinating, engaging stories. I remember, for example, watching The Sixth Sense, the M. Night Shyamalan movie about more or less, and The Sixth Sense's ability, for example, to see more or less dead people. And I remember growing up in Sierra Leone thinking, but we have that same concept. In Sierra Leone, they more or less say that certain people are born and they have eyes. What that necessarily means that you have the ability to see things that other people don't see. I also wrote a story, for example, about I think a water devil. We believe, for example, in Sierra Leone, that at certain times you do not go swimming in water, for example, at nighttime, because there are creatures, for example, that can kidnap and kill you. And so water is more or less afforded this reverence and this respect. So I've always thought about how to perhaps examine these stories to do with traditional folklores and traditions and things like that. So if I had to venture, like I said, I've dabbled in these genres when it comes to short stories, but it'll be interesting to see if I could take that more or less, harness these ideas and build them up into a full novel. So it would definitely be literary fiction and possibly a bit of magical realism or a bit of fantasy.
Great. And what have you both? This is my favourite author chat question. So we've dipped around other people's favourite questions. You're going to get mine. What have you read recently and really enjoyed?
David?
You take it. Yeah, I knew you were going to do that.
We can do non-crime as well. We don't mind.
Well, I've read a couple of things quite relatively recently. The one that blew me away the most was All the Colors of the Dark by Chris Whitaker. I read that.
I bought that. I've not read it yet.
Oh, it's so good. I read it because I was interviewing him when he was doing his paperback tour, and he came to Edinburgh, and I don't know what I expected. It was one of those books where last year at Harrogate, people kept grabbing me by the elbow and being like, "Have you read All the Colors of the Dark?"
Okay.
And I was like, "Oh." And it lived up to that level of hype. Like people just, and they were like, "No, seriously, you have to." I know people are always like, "This is a groundbreaking book," blah blah blah. But seriously, you have to read this book. And I eventually read it because Chris was coming up, and I was, it's the first book of his that I'd ever read, and I was just like, it's one of those books that makes you feel like, what am I even doing here? I should probably just.
Oh yeah, I know that feeling.
And another book that I read was The Seventh Floor, which is by David McCloskey, who is an ex-CIA analyst, and he wrote this series of loosely linked series of spy novels. First one is Damascus Station, second one is Moscow X, and the third one is The Seventh Floor, and they all feature this CIA station chief called Artemis Proctor, which is a fantastic character name. And this one is her outside the CIA trying to find a mole inside the CIA, and it's quite a deliberate retelling of Smiley's People, the kind of final George Smiley novel from John le Carré. There's loads of references to that book in this book, but it's just really well done. And Artemis Proctor goes from being kind of a side character in the first novel, and she's kind of central to the second one, and this is absolutely her book, and it's so good, and it's both hilarious and also just like a really good spycraft, tradecraft, espionage novel as well.
Good. Well, like I said earlier, I think I read Squeaky Clean recently, and I think it's just one of the best things I've ever read. I think it was his debut novel, but also won, I think, the Makavani Prize, and you can totally understand why. Because I mean, it's just his ability. Like I said, I've lived in Scotland for quite a while now. It's just this ability to address or to look at such visceral and such violent crime, but also to juxtapose it with more or less this element of hilarity and humor. And he does it brilliantly, and the dialogue is so authentic. I mean, the scenes, for example, in the car wash, they're brilliant. I mean, comedy gold, absolutely fantastic. So, and even the criminals, I mean, is it Paolo, who is more or less this overlord, this crime boss in Glasgow. But the scenes it's so well done, and even the twist at the end. I think I started reading the second one Is it, yeah, the part two or the sequel the other day, but I think it's just phenomenal. And I just think, yeah, it's one of the best things I've ever read. I've also recently read there's Sebastian Faulks, The Seventh Son. Again, I read it because again I'm thinking similar to what we spoke about earlier. And I'm quite interested to see like authors more or less jump between different genres. So, for example, he wrote Birdsong, which is this big, war epic, but this seems to be a bit more sci-fi, whereby it's about a postgrad student who wants to make a bit of money to fund further studies, and so she agrees to become a surrogate mother to carry a child for this couple in London. She comes from America, and unbeknownst to her, they basically inject the embryo with more or less Neanderthal DNA. And it's more or less what happens to the child when the child is born. It basically affects the child's mental capacity and what the child does. So, yeah,
Great.
again, it's interesting to see how he looks at this particular genre and takes it into different directions. So, yeah, I found that to be quite fascinating also. Yeah, good.
Cool. We've got a couple of minutes left of our
Okay.
chat. So remind anyone who's watching, if they've not already bought your book, what they're going to go away and buy. Who wants to start?
Oh,
Yeah,
so can you say the question again? Sorry, I didn't.
So remind everyone who's watching, if they haven't already bought your book, what they're going to go away and buy.
You can buy A Reluctant Spy. This is the paperback, came out in June. And it's also available in audio and ebook, and there's I think a few hardbacks kicking around. There's a special edition as well from Goldsboro Books, and I think there's a few copies of that left as well, but most people will be getting the paperback these days, and you can get that at all good retailers and a few sketchy ones as well. Yeah, you can find out more about it on my website, which is davidgoodman.net.
Oh, the same. Yeah, mine again. I think mine's available in hardback. It was released on the 22nd of May. It's a good example. I think I've got a friend at work, Mr. Stephen Tolman, and he classified it as a good example of diaspora noir. And I think that's a good quite a way to classify it in the sense that you will be getting a crime novel, but it also looks at a specific class of people, more or less the immigrant community in Scotland. And I've always more or less, for example, said I don't think nobody has a monopoly on misery. In other words, it happens to everybody. Murders, crime, despicable acts of violence happen to people irrespective of creed. So it's a good example. It's a good opportunity, for example, to see a crime novel from more or less the perspective of a different type or different class of people that maybe you don't necessarily always see within the pages of crime fiction.
Lovely. And then all that's left for me, so well, Patsy has said thank you. She's already bought both books and read them. So she will meet you either at Bloody Scotland or Edinburgh.
Magic.
Thank you, Patsy.
That's kind of viewer you want, isn't it?
Yeah,
Definitely.
100%. If you do have a copy, come and see me. If you see me at Bloody Scotland, I've got a special declassified stamp that I can put on it that I made myself on Canva, and it looks very official. And I'll happily stamp your book and sign it as well.
Yeah, I've got 2 copies of David because the first one I bought, what happened is it was left outside in the rain. And so by the time I found it was honestly, when I come up, I'll show both of them to you. It's like bloated. So even though I dried it with David, the one copy is actually quite bloated. It's like swollen. But I had to balance. I thought I'll give him both to sign. So I'll bring the bloated copy that was damaged by water. Copy for you
Yeah, I'll
to sign.
happily sign that.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Definitely.
And all that's left for me is to say thank you and good luck.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Okay, cheers. Bye. See you later, Dave. Bye. Thank you, Kaz.
You're very welcome.